Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Cambridge Experience 2024. We are delighted to have you here with us today. Since 2010, Colégio Farroupilha has been at the forefront of education by incorporating Cambridge English exam preparation into its curriculum. This integration connects our students' proficiency levels with the international standards of the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages, ensuring a communicative and effective learning environment for our students. This year marks the 6th edition of Cambridge Experience, which began in 2019. with a mission to enhance the professional development of English language teachers and positively influence education practices.
Inspired by the pioneering work of John and Britta Haycraft, who shaped English teaching and professional development since the 1950s, we've had the privilege of hosting many distinguished speakers, such names as Nick Saville, Silvana Richardson, Ben Knight, Jasmine Silva, Alberto Costa, Glenn Hughes, Joanna Zouk, and Mirella Ramazziotti. We are proud to continue this tradition and thrilled to welcome Aynur Karakoc, Pablo Toledo, and esteemed Scott Thornbury. Over the past 6 years, the Cambridge Experience has hosted 19 lectures and engaged more than 8,500 participants. This success wouldn't have been possible without the support of Cambridge University Press and Assessment, particularly Leonardo Esperança and Sheila Evans.
Furthermore, the Cambridge Experience led to the establishment of our Farroupilha Open Center. As an authorized center, we are excited to offer Cambridge exams and collaborate with institutions like yours. Consider becoming a preparation center of BR 249. We hope you find today's event inspiring and valuable. Wishing you an excellent Cambridge experience.
Good morning, everyone, again. I'm Luciane Calcara, the manager of the Cambridge and Foreign Language Center at Farroupilha School. I'm delighted that we are joined by teachers, head teachers, coordinators, and directors from across Brazil, including Rio Grande do Sul, São Paulo, Rio de Janeiro, and Minas Gerais, and some parts of the world as well, such as UK, Italy, Switzerland, Luxembourg, Spain, and Portugal. Our distinguished guest speakers today are Pablo Toledo, Senior Assessment Services Manager for Southern Cone and Ends in Cambridge University Press and Assessment. He'll be joining us from Portugal. Aynur Karakoc, Senior Impactor Evaluator at Cambridge University Press and Assessment, based in Cambridge, UK. Scott Thornbury, a renowned teacher trainer and writer in the field of ELT. Scott is involved in a number of courses and projects, and you'll hear more about him soon. He speaks to us from Barcelona, Spain. And now, not least, our MC for this event, Alberto Costa, who has been with us since the beginning of Cambridge Experience, and without whom this event wouldn't be possible. Alberto, the floor is yours. Thank you.
We are delighted, in spite of all this, to share this moment with you, and we hope you enjoy this event. We have simultaneous translation to Portuguese available, so in case you have a colleague who would prefer to listen to the talks in Portuguese, they can click the globe on the menu, and then they can choose Portuguese translation, yes? So the globe is at the bottom of the screen. So throughout the event, you can submit questions through the chat, right? We actually ask you to use the Q&A for questions and the chat for comments and for interaction with the speakers. Because of the duration, it may not be possible for us to address all the questions, but we have our team, and our team will make every effort to relay the thoughts and make sure that those questions go to the speakers, and hopefully we can somehow get back to you with some possible answers. So the event has a certificate, and the certificate will be available for download to all of those who respond to our feedback survey. I know, I'm sure this will appear in the feedback, the problem we had at the beginning, but we hope that in spite of this, the event will run smoothly, right? And this survey will be sent to the email provided during the Cambridge Experience registration. So I'd like to introduce our first guest, Pablo Toledo, who will give the lecture End-to-End Teaching, Learning, and Assessment in the Communicative Classroom. Pablo is speaking to us from Buenos Aires, and Pablo is a Senior Assessment Services Manager for Southern Cone and Andes. He covers many countries, and he works in the Cambridge University Present Assessment Office based in Buenos Aires. He is an English teacher, a teacher trainer with a postgraduate advanced certificate in educational assessment from the University of Cambridge, and he also has a diploma in education policy from Universidad Torquato de Telha, or de Techa, because he's in Buenos Aires. Before joining Cambridge, Pablo managed projects in the area of remote teaching, internationalization of higher education, and language teaching to refugees for the British Council, and he also led the education department of the Buenos Aires Herald newspaper. He is currently the president of La Alta, the Latin American Association of Language Testing and Assessment. So, Pablo, bienvenido to our event. It's a pleasure to have you with us, and we apologize for the hiccup we had a moment ago. The floor is yours, Pablo.
Thank you very much, Alberto. Thank you to everybody, and thank you, Alberto. Thank you to everybody for coming here, being here today. Thank you, Farroupilha, for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here, just as it was a pleasure to be in Brazil just, well, a couple of months, a few weeks ago. So thank you very much for joining us, and I will now start sharing my screen and sharing with you this session. So today we will be talking about end-to-end teaching, learning, and assessing in the communicative language classroom. And what does that mean? Well, basically, this is an invitation to begin thinking about where assessment fits in the work that we do. And just, well, I don't want to give any spoilers. So, and because it is early in the morning, let's forget about learning English for a moment. And let's talk about coffee. You know, in Brazil, do as Brazilians do. And it's early morning, so coffee seemed like a suitable topic to begin. So what makes a cup of coffee good or bad? I'd invite you to think of this question. What are the qualities that make the difference between a good cup of coffee and a bad cup of coffee? Well, it seems simple to just give an answer like, well, it's a cup of coffee. I know it when I see it. I drink it. I like it. I don't like it. But actually, if you're thinking of, there are people who do this for a living. We have coffee competitions. If you look at the bags of coffee in the supermarket, you see things like winner of the world's best coffee for 2023 or something like that. So I looked at the standards that coffee tasters and professional coffee organizations use when they assess coffee, when they judge coffee. What are the things that they are looking at, the things that make a difference between a good and a bad cup of coffee? So, number one is sweetness. Coffee has a natural element of sweetness, which may or may not be present. There may be more or less of it. There may be different qualities of sweetness. And this is one of the things. It's not that sweetness is good and no sweetness is bad. It's just that this is one of the things that make that difference. The other thing is body. Body, well, we will be talking about what body means. Also acidity. Coffee, the taste of coffee, there is a balance between sweetness and acidity, and the presence and the kind and the intensity of acidity is one of the things that judges are looking for. Then flavors, you know, this thing, we have the same thing with wine. Like when I drink this coffee, I see notes of cherry or strawberries or fruit or something. It tastes like old cardboard. Well, that must be airline coffee. But what are the other flavors besides the obvious, well, it tastes of coffee? What are the other things that this coffee evokes? And then finally, finish. Finish, basically, like once you've drank the coffee, what is the feeling left in your mouth after drinking that cup of coffee? Now, again, this is not that finish is good or flavor is good or acidity is good, sweetness is bad. It's just that these are the qualities that judges are looking for. But now, if we're going to judge coffee, we need to be a lot more specific than, look for these 5 things. So let's focus on body. That's the reason I didn't describe it before. I looked up again in the standards that judges and competitions use. How do they describe body? Well, they say this is the weight and feel of the coffee on your tongue. Does the coffee feel like light, like skim milk, or heavy, like whipping cream? So this is, okay, this is giving us something. Now I know what I'm looking for when I'm looking for body, the weight and feel of the coffee on your tongue. This is helping. Now, can we break this down? Can we be more specific? What do we mean exactly by this? To evaluate the body of a coffee sample, tasters will consider the thickness, the creaminess, and the viscosity of the brewed coffee. A high-quality coffee will have a full and satisfying body that enhances the overall sensory experience. Okay, now I get it. Because when I'm tasting a cup of coffee, there are 3 things I want to focus on to understand body, or to get a sense or a perception of the body of that coffee. The thickness I feel, how creamy it feels, and the viscosity of the coffee. Okay, if I was a coffee judge, I would be trained in exactly what these mean and what things to look for. So this is actually helping me. This is giving me something concrete. It's not just, well, coffee is good. All right. One of the things that make coffee good or bad is body. Okay, this is how we describe it. Better. Now, thickness, creaminess, viscosity. These are 3 specific things I'm looking for. I am keeping an eye out for. Now, a very important thing that we know as teachers is that if we're going to judge things like a full and satisfying body with thickness, creaminess, and viscosity, we need to have different levels. We need to define, okay, what is a good one? What is a bad one? Or we need different categories that we can put these labels on. So what are the rubrics that they use? Well, again, these are rubrics they use for body. Full bodied is strong and pleasant, even with a tactile sense of viscosity, like an espresso, a very strong, thick coffee. Medium body indicates a coffee that seems diluted and poor to espresso lovers, but with just the right amount of body to consumers preferring filtered coffee. And round body is the set of sensations dictated by taste and consistency, free of excessive or inadequate tastes, with a perceived sense of balance. Now, if I was a coffee judge and I was trained as a coffee judge, then I would, with these categories and these descriptions, I would be able to taste a cup of coffee and say, okay, this is medium body, this is round body, this is full body. And then, in theory, other judges who are also trained using the same standards should come to the same conclusion. When we taste the same cup of coffee, we should all say, yeah, this is medium body. Now, if we were teaching coffee instead of English, life would be amazing. And I mean, we're in Brazil, and or many of you are in Brazil, many of you are in actual parts of Brazil where coffee is grown. So I envy you for that. If we were teaching coffee instead of English, what things would we have to mind? What things would we have to do? Well, the first question to address is, how would we design a coffee quality syllabus? And now, the way in which we design a coffee quality syllabus is going to be very closely connected to these qualities of coffee that we have been discussing. It needs to be grounded on that. So one of the units in my coffee tasting thing would be body, because this is one of the things that is connected to what makes coffee good. Then we would, of course, have other units, because it's not just about judging quality. So like the history of coffee, or where coffee is grown in the world, and why Colombians think they have coffee, but they have dirty black water. Now, what activities would we include in the body unit? I said body is going to be one of the units in my coffee course. Okay, what activities am I going to put in there to make people understand the difference, notice the difference, agree on what full-bodied or light-bodied is? I need some theory, I need some background, and then I need some practice, and very specific practice, going into more general things. I need to design things to make people incorporate the notion and the practice of body of coffee. And what kind of tests would we design for this course? So we are going to design tests at the end of each unit. So at the end of a body unit, a test would be like tasting 15 different cups and then agreeing on which label, and then describing the body specifically, nothing else, just the body. But then at the end of the course, we need to, or at the end of the following unit, we need to review body, or see how body compares with, or aligns, or doesn't, or combines with sweetness. And then, of course, at the end of the course, I'm going to have activities that are going to incorporate everything, including body. So I'm going to have to design new activities to test body. And then I'm going to need some theory questions, and then I'm going to need lots of practical exercises, and many, many other things, which I'm not too familiar with, because I know a little bit about coffee. I know I like it, but I'm not an expert, and that makes a difference. So, recapping, what is it that we have done so far? We have chosen a subject, coffee. We defined that subject in theory. We said this is what makes coffee good or bad. We turned that definition into observable features. We said that body is thickness, creaminess, and viscosity. Then we defined a criteria for that feature. We said full-bodied versus round-bodied versus balanced. Then we designed a syllabus. And then we designed an evaluation tool, all of these unit tests and tasting tests and theory tests and blah, blah, blah that I was just talking about. Now, it's time to talk about English, because you're probably thinking, Pablo has been talking about this crazy thing for about 10 minutes, but we are not here to, we don't teach coffee, we drink coffee, we teach English. And you're probably thirsty about now. So if you're home, have yourself a cup of coffee, you've earned it. So, when we talk about English, what are we teaching and assessing? Let's rebuild the same path. Let's do the same path that we just did for coffee, but this time we do it for English. What is it that we are teaching and assessing? Well, first of all, I hope you agree with me, and if you don't, we can have a separate conversation another time, that we teach language as communication, that we are part of the communicative, that we work within the communicative language teaching paradigm. And basically, in a very, very brief nutshell, it means that we believe that language is a tool, so that we use language to do things, that we don't study English because we want to learn vocabulary and grammar and syntax, that we study English because we want to do things with English, like communicate with other people. And then we believe, and then another strong element is that language is a competence. And competence, it's a bit of a big word. So let's get into, let's do a deep dive into what we mean by competence. So According to the Common European Framework of Reference, the framework that we are working within in Cambridge and Farroupilha has adopted, and that I hope you are familiar with to some degree, defines competence as this. Competence is the sum of knowledge, skills, and characteristics that allow a person to perform actions. So it's the sum of things. There are things I know, things I have incorporated and that I know as theory, as concepts. It's made up of things I can do, my skills. It has an element of characteristics, of things that I am. And all of these things are used to perform actions, to do things. So I know vocabulary and grammar and phrases and blah, 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 blah in English. I can do things with, there are things that I can do. There are things that are characteristics in me, like I am inquisitive, I am empathic, I am a good communicator, I am critical thinker, I am, etc., etc., etc. And I combine all of these things I know I can do and my characteristics to do things with, in this case, language. Now, all human competencies, and I continue to quote from the framework, contribute in one way or another to the language user's ability to communicate. When we communicate, we are not just communicating using our language-specific competencies. There are other things that come into play. Let's look at some of those. So, there are general competencies, and there is communicative language competence specifically, but general competencies also play a role when we use English in our case. General competencies are not specific to language. They are used for all activities, including language. And they are things like our knowledge of the world, like our intercultural skills, like our metacognitive skills, our ability to learn, our memory, etc., etc., etc. There are many things that interact with the way we communicate, but are not specific of language and linguistic communication. And then come the communicative language competencies specifically. And there are three aspects of that: linguistic, social linguistic, and pragmatic. Now, linguistic competencies are things to do with lexis, grammar, and semantics, vocabulary, grammar, and things around that, how to form a correct sentence. Social linguistic competencies cover things like social relations, politeness, register, dialect, accent. Language is not just something that we use to make correct sentences. There are social elements to that, and social linguistic aspects relate to that, tie back to that. So when we can make a correct sentence syntactically, semantically, but if it is not polite enough, if the register is wrong, then it is not going to be interpreted because of the social dynamics of language. And then pragmatic things like discourse and functional competencies. So we don't speak in sentences, we speak in longer bits of discourse, and how we connect one sentence with the next sentence, with the following sentence, how we build an argument, etc., etc. All of these things are covered by the pragmatic competencies, the discourse competencies. Okay, now, from this, so we have chosen our subject, competence, we have narrowed it down to communicative competencies, and we have broken it down into areas or aspects. And then we use all of that to do things. So we use our communicative language competence to perform communicative activities. And communicative activities are defined as there is reception, things that we use to receive language, to interpret, to decode, to understand. There are productive skills, there are productive activities, production. There is mediation, when we use language to mediate between things or transfer from one language to another. And my good friend Alberto Costa talks about this extensively in some of his sessions. So I invite you to be there for one of them. And then, of course, this happens in interaction. So reception and production, when we are having a conversation, they happen simultaneously, or there is an interaction in which they're happening at the same time or one after the other, and how do we modulate that? And these things happen both in oral and in written form. The Common European Framework actually also acknowledges that these things happen in sign language, but we are working with English, not with sign languages, so I left that out to simplify things a bit. So far, now we are focusing on English, not coffee. We have chosen a subject, communicative competence, and we have defined that subject in theory. We have developed the theory of how to go from the definition of competence to the specific communicative activities. Let's move on. But before we move on, where does assessment fit into all of this? And to begin with that, or to talk about that, we need to first define what is assessment anyway, right? So I'm going to use my favorite definition for assessment, which was written by a person called Tim McNamara in 2010. He used it in a course that he taught in Australia, where he was based in the University of Melbourne. And he said that assessment is a process. I already love the fact that he says that it's a process. It's not something that we do one day. It's an ongoing thing. Or it's a process of what? It's a process of observing evidence from performance, because I cannot actually open a window into my student's brain and see the present perfect forming there. I need to ask them to do things, and that is going to give me evidence of what they know or don't know. So I ask them to do something, to perform, and then I observe that the evidence from the things that they do. And then to interpret that evidence, I'm going to decide this is correct, incorrect, this is what I expected or not, this fits into this category or that category, etc., so that I can reach conclusions about what individuals know and can do. So they know this, they don't know this, they know this, but they need some development of that. They show strengths in this and weaknesses in that. They are ready to pass, they are not at the level they need to pass, etc. Different kinds of assessment are going to have completely different conclusions and questions. And then the last step, super important, in order to make decisions based on those conclusions. Because assessment is not over when we just put a grade or a number or a letter, or when we give our students feedback. It is actually completed when we use that feedback to make a decision about learning or teaching. So once again, highlight, we cannot define assessment without thinking about teaching and learning. Assessment, teaching, learning, it's one thing. We cannot talk about assessment without talking about what we do next. Assessment is about making a decision moving forward. If you don't, you have not assessed. And then we come back to the functions of assessment. And I'm going to borrow an old example originally proposed by Jim Scriven, picked up again by Paul Black and Dylan William, which is, look at these two people assessing food, judging food. Now, are they assessing food in the same way for the same purposes? Typically, we would say no, that when the cooks do it, it is formative assessment. When it happens when the people at the restaurant do it, it is summative assessment. And what are the typical features that we connect with these? Formative. And then, are they different? Are they exclusive? I'm here to propose to you that formative and summative, which we usually think of being as separate things, are actually not that different. They are two orientations of assessment with one common goal. Assessment becomes formative assessment when the evidence is actually used to adapt the teaching work to meet the needs. So what makes assessment formative is not that we do it as a unit test or as a quiz at the end of the lesson, but that we take the evidence and we use it to adapt our work, what we do in teaching next, to meet the needs of our learners, to help them get to the objective. What makes assessment formative is not that it is a big test at the end of the year. What makes assessment formative or summative is not the difference between a big test at the end of the year and a quiz at the end of a lesson. What makes assessment formative is how we use that feedback. And then Paul Black and Dylan William. Black and William are names that you, if you're interested in formative assessment, or if you have ever heard the phrase assessment for learning, these are the two people that actually came up with assessment for learning as a phrase. And their work is essential for anyone interested in these topics. So what they say is that assessment is formative to the extent that evidence about student achievement is elicited, interpreted, and used. Elicited, interpreted, and used. So this is all going back to Tim McNamara's definition just again, right? By teachers, by learners, and by their peers. So it's not just about the teacher giving feedback. It is about other peers being able to give feedback, but mostly about learners themselves. Because we have to remember that the goal of teaching English is to develop autonomy. So what we want our students to do is to develop step by step the skill to be assessors of their own production, so that in 15 years' time, when they're working and they need to write an email, they are able to read the email that they wrote and to be a good, and to give themselves feedback, to say, this does the job that I need to do. This is not very clear. I need to improve this. How can I do this better? That level of autonomy is self-assessment. And so assessment is formative to the extent that evidence about student achievement is elicited, interpreted, and used by teachers, learners, or their peers to make decisions about the next step on instruction. So the focus of formative assessment is on the next steps. It is like when we are driving, you need to look forward, you need to look ahead. You also need a rear view mirror, but the formative feedback aspect is the looking at what is next and making a decision about, am I going in the right direction? I need to turn right, left, I need to turn right. And what is going to make the difference? The difference is going to be that the decisions that we make about the next steps are better founded than the decisions that teachers would have taken in the absence of the evidence that was elicited. So the test of a good test is that, or the test of any assessment instrument is the decisions that I made with the information that I got from my assessment. Was it a better decision than I would have taken without that evidence? Is it the same decision? Actually, it didn't make a difference. I didn't pay attention. Or actually, what we don't want to see, is it, did I do a test? Did I get the feedback? Did I get the results? Did I implement? Did I take measures based on that? And the things that I did were worse. So a good assessment instrument is one that allows you to make good decisions. The focus of formative feedback is on the next steps and is on making better decisions about where we want our students to go. So at this point, you're thinking, hey, assessment, learning, it's simple maths, right? Teaching plus assessment equals learning, right? I teach, then I assess, and that helps people learn better, right? Wrong. Because actually, there is no coffee and there is no milk. There is no teaching. There is no assessment. There is only latte. There is no coffee. There is no milk. There is only latte. Where does the coffee end and the milk begin in my cup of latte? It doesn't. It's the same thing with teaching and learning. Where does assessment, do we stop, do assessment, and then continue teaching, learning? No, it is one thing. There is only latte. So let's pick up where we left off, talking about the end-to-end, because we defined communicative language competence, and we talked about our model for our model of competence. Now, we chose a subject, we defined it in theory. Let's move forward and turn that definition into observable features and define a criteria for that feature, just as we did for coffee. So where we start with the Common European Framework. And this is the most generic definition, kind of definition we can find, which is called the global scale. So a B1 learner is somebody who can do these things. This is the most generic definition of what being a B1 user of English or any language, what being a B1 user of language is according to the Common European Framework. And let's focus on one aspect of that. Let's be specific and drill down into one of these features. Let's focus on the fact that B1 users of language can describe experiences and events and give reasons and explanations for opinions and plans. So let's focus on these aspects of that description. Where it follows, the self-assessment grid. Within the Common European Framework, you have self-assessment scales that allow you that allow actual users. These are great things to share with our learners, by the way. The self-assessment scales allow us, and they translate, and this is broken down by different communicative activities. So one communicative activity, spoken production, speaking. How does this translate into the speaking self-assessment statement? Well, I can briefly give reasons and explanations for opinions and plans. I can narrate a story or relate the plot of a book or film and describe my reactions in speaking. And then there is something similar in writing. I can write personal letters describing experiences and impressions. These are the ways in which this high level can describe experiences and events, blah, 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 is translated or turns into different communicative activities. Now, let's focus on writing and let's focus on the ways in which we can make it visible. Now, with body, we talked about creaminess, thickness, and viscosity. Well, with writing in this case, let's drill into writing. In Cambridge, we break this down into 4 things. These are the 4, we call them subscales, assessment subscales. When we look at a piece of writing, we are looking at these 4 aspects: content, communicative achievement, organization, and language. Another time, I'll be more than happy to share what each of these mean. But for the purposes of today's session, let's just say that at the level B1, we have specific expectations of what we are looking for, an expected performance level for communicative achievement, organization, language, content too, but it works slightly differently. And then we don't just have a definition of what we expect, we have a definition of different levels of performance from 0 to 5. And we have descriptors, we have rubrics for bands 5, 3, 1, and then we have training that we do with our raters on how to implement this. So when our raters are looking at a piece of language, like judges with a cup of coffee in their hands, they are looking at these 4 aspects. And if it is a piece of B1, or if they are assessing at the level B1, they are basically saying, with this aspect, with the communicative achievement aspect, which of these descriptions does it fit best? And this is how we assess, and this is how we can get to a more, technically speaking, we would say a more reliable, a more consistent standard of assessment. And then we have the different scale. So this is how the different bands for the different aspects look. What is the next step? The next step is to go from the Common European Framework, which we use to break down our communicative activity at this level, the writing for B1. Then we look at the standards we're going to use to assess it. What happens when we get to the textbook? What happens when we turn this into a teaching unit? Well, this is what Unit 5 from Think Second Edition Level 3, which is a B1 course. This is what Unit 5 looks like, what the summary of Unit 5 from the contents page looks like. So where are the aspects of our B1 definition reflected? Well, we have telling a story in our functions and speaking. This comes directly from that definition that you see at the top. Grammar, right? We have the grammatical elements that we are going to use. To do these things, we are going to need tools, language tools. Some of these tools to tell stories, to give our opinions, are going to be relative pronouns, relative clauses. Then we have a vocabulary focus on elements of a story or types of story, because to tell a story, we need to know about stories and we need language to do it with. Then we have thinking, like our general competencies. In this case, thinking about different writing styles. These are our general, not necessarily linguistic competencies and how they apply to the way we use language. And then we're going to have skills practice. So an article series on the books are always better than films, how to give opinions, which is one of the things that is in that definition. Then a blog, so you want to write a novel, so going back to the idea of narrative. And then a writing specific practice, a short paragraph expressing an opinion. So you can see how we have broken this down into things that go into our teaching unit from different aspects, from presentation to practice to production. Then, of course, we have to teach it. So if we go into this unit, Unit 5 in Level 3 of Think Second Edition, we see that we have presentation of expressions and a listening activity on functions for telling a story. We have a text, a reading text. We have our thinking skills boxes, thinking about writing in different styles, what makes a good story, storytelling in the Caribbean. So all of these things are going to give us a global introduction to storytelling. Then we need to teach the mechanics of it. The mechanics are going to be the grammatical tools we use, like relative pronouns. Then the language, the elements of a story. And then more expressions and phrases and ways to speak about these things. What kind of story would you like to write? What kind of stories do you enjoy most? And the language that we use to express our views on this. And then, of course, we need practice, and we need specific grammar practice. And basically, what we've done now is design a syllabus, and now we need to design an evaluation tool for this. Let's move into the next step. So where the assessment is going to be there all along, because we know that assessment, there is no milk, there is no coffee, there is no teaching, learning, there is no assessment, it's all one. So we have things like elements of assessment within the units. So tests for the units, which are going to look into each of the individual elements. And then an extension test, because students come in different shapes and sizes. And for those who are strong or fast finishers, we are going to need activities that will challenge them more. But then at the end of the course, we are going to go into the big summative moment. And the big summative moment for this level, for B1, is B1 preliminary. In this case, B1 preliminary for schools, our Cambridge exam at the level B1. Once you have completed and done all of the formative assessment throughout your B1 course, you are ready to actually now, yes, let's look back and make a decision. How good, or make a judgment of how strong is your B1? What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? Can we actually say that you have achieved the expected level? And how can we help you move to the next challenge, move towards B2, C1, or whatever your learning aim is? So we are going to begin by testing the mechanics. And this is part 5 of our reading component from B1 preliminary. And what you see is here just a gap, multiple choice closed test. There is a gap, you have 4 options, and a lot of that most of the focus here is going to be on grammar, vocabulary, collocations, etc., syntax. The next level of challenge from this is this beautiful phrase, open close. Sounds like a contradiction in terms. The open close is when we have a gap, but now we are not giving you choices. We are basically telling you, fill the gap with anything. The focus is similar to the previous one, but this time, because you have more freedom, there is a bit more of a challenge. But then we are going to test the performance. And this is one part one of the writing test for B1 preliminary. And if what you have to do is, number one, this is an interactive task because you have to read first and then write a response. So, and then you receive this email with ideas for a party, an end of class party. And then you have to explain something, you have to make a suggestion, and you have to tell Mrs. Lake what food you think we should have at the party. Now, if you remember our definition for B1, there was something there about giving you reasons for your opinions. There was something there about saying things that you think and expressing things like pros and cons and how you feel about things. So if you've been paying attention, you can see that from that global scale definition of B1 into the communicative activity of writing, into the expectations of writing for B1, into how we broke this down, into the unit, into now all of that is connected down to the summative assessment. There is a thread, a golden thread that connects all of the things that we do. They need to align. We cannot have an assessment tool that is here if our teaching is here. They need to be like this. And they need to just flow from one to the other because there is no coffee, there is no milk. And then the second part of the writing test is telling us what you find, giving us your opinion about something, telling us what you find funny, or do you think it's good to laugh a lot, and write an article giving reasons. So this develops the other elements. When we design a B1 summative exam like B1 preliminary, what we are basically doing is breaking down the skills and saying, okay, this is everything that is expected from B1. How can we design activities that will showcase that? So job done, right? We chose a subject, we defined the subject in theory, we turned the definition into observable features, we designed a syllabus, and now we designed evaluation tools, formative, summative, and everything aligns, everything is beautiful, right? That's it. Now we can have our cup of coffee and just take a break, take a holiday. Not yet. I'm sorry, guys. Why? What is missing? If we remember our definition, what we need, the next step is that we need to take all of the assessment activity that we have done and use that information to make decisions based on our conclusions, right? We need to interpret the results. And making those decisions is going to be a story for our Cambridge State 2025. If I am invited again, then I will be very happy to share how to talk about interpretation of exam results and how that can feed back into the things that we do next. But that's a story for next time, if you'll have me, Alberto, of course.
Thank you so much. Gracias for your great talk. I think this talk needs to be, reverberated in so many teaching contexts because I mean, the way you make the analogy between coffee, milk, latte, teaching, learning, and assessment is absolutely great. I hear very positive comments about not only the analogy that you have made, but also about the way you delivered the topic, with such clarity. I think this, speaks for itself. So lots of positive comments. I am biased to talk about you because I admire you and I have the privilege of working with you in many initiatives in Brazil, Latin America, which is great. But can I please ask you a question, Pablo? I know your analogy was crystal clear, but still, in some contexts, we see that teachers may have the perception that you teach and then you stop to make the assessment because it's the end of term or it's the midterm, quiz or test or something. But as you said, assessment is everywhere. It's from end to end. What piece of advice would you give those teachers?
So yes, there is this teach, stop, test paradigm, like you just described. I'm teaching, I stop, and then I'm testing. Now, however, if you think about, I mean, my first piece of advice would be think about what assessment actually is and that definition that I included there. Assessment is what we use to make decisions about what to do next. If you think about it like that, then if I am standing in the classroom, I'm delivering a lesson, and then I'm looking at my students' faces. They're all there in front of me, or if we are online, I see their windows on Zoom. I am making assessment decisions all the time. If I explain something to my students, or I'm giving an example, or I'm presenting a new activity or something, I'm looking at their faces. Do they look like, do they look engaged? Can they do things? That, small as it sounds, moment. So the thing is, it's a bit like there is this phrase, I think it was from Cyrano de Bergerac or something, one of the French guys, that said, suddenly a character says, oh, I haven't realized I have been speaking in prose all my life and I didn't know it. Because when you say prose, it sounds like something writers would do. But no, I speak in prose because I don't speak in verse. Well, we teachers, we have done assessment all the time, all of our lives, without realizing. So my piece of advice is, if you start thinking about all of those things, I mean, if you give those things the status of assessment, then what you need to do is basically connect the dots. I have been doing assessment all the time in every activity, every common errors session, every bit of feedback I've given my students, every piece of practice, homework, extra activities. Then all of that is just as much of an assessment moment as the unit test, as the big test at the end of a year, which means that all of that needs to be joined up. I need to be consistent and I need to have a plan for what I want to know, when I need to know it, and then what I'm going to do with that, with those results. Think of that as you design everything else, because the problem is, if we design, this is my teaching unit and this is my assessment at the end. If your teaching unit doesn't have assessment the whole time, everywhere, then you don't know what to do next. You're just teaching automatically. You say, page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4, activity 1, activity 2, activity 3. And that doesn't help anybody.
Yeah, thank you so much. I mean, teaching is not like pushing the play button. I mean, and assessment is here, there, and everywhere. So I think the analogy that you make, is crystal clear. But I always like to highlight this point, whenever I can, that assessment is part of everything. It's not a moment where you stop teaching and learning to do the assessment. Thank you so much once again for taking the time on a Saturday morning to be with teachers in Brazil to talk about assessment. This is really much appreciated.
It's always a pleasure, and thank you everybody for the invitation. And you said that you have the privilege of working with me and all of that. You know the feeling's mutual, Alberto.
Yeah, well, this is the confetti moment, as we say in Brazil. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We are going to continue with our event. And for now, I have the pleasure of introducing Aynur Karakoc. Aynur will be giving the lecture Exploring CLIL in Education. And she will also talk about practical insights and strategies. Aynur is speaking from Cambridge. She is a senior impact evaluator at Cambridge University Press and Assessment. She has a PhD, which she obtained from Victoria University of Wellington, and her research interests are in content and language integrated learning, CLIL, integrated writing assessment, language learning pedagogies and assessment. Now, Aynur, the floor is yours, and thank you for being with us this morning.
Hi, everyone. Hello. Thank you so much, Alberto. Okay, so today we're going to talk about CLIL and effective teaching practices. This is the outline of my talk. I will explain the rationale behind CLIL. So why do we need CLIL? What is CLIL? The approaches to understanding CLIL. The famous 4Cs principle, the underlying principle of CLIL. And then we're going to see some common challenges across the globe and try to find some answers to those challenges. I will then present effective teaching practices, and then together we will do some activities. Okay, so let's first understand the rationale, the need for the CLIL. We know that there's growing need for the English language across the globe. So if you're familiar with the term English as a lingua franca, the English language doesn't only belong to the people speaking English as a first language, but it also belongs to the people speaking different languages. So there are different people across many cultures speaking English language or want to learn English language in order to share knowledge, experiences together. So this gives the need for plurilingualism focused education model. Now, this is the model which was introduced in European Union and European Commission. They came up with the idea that in this increasing world, the students, the young generation, they need to share their knowledge with each other or with people across different contexts, and they need to be able to learn that language or to share that language, that knowledge, not only in their L1, like not only in their mother tongue, but in other languages as well, whether it is English, whether it's Portuguese, Spanish, etc. So then this idea, according to this idea, an approach to language education to promote pluriliteracy and plurilingualism was founded according to the action plan of European Commission. Now, based on this action plan and on this justification, this is how content and language integrated learning was formulated. There is not only one definition of CLIL. In a broad sense, according to Marsh, CLIL is an approach in which a foreign language is used as a tool in the learning of a non-language subject in which both language and the subject have a joint role. So in an EFL context, for example, in Brazil, if you're teaching CLIL subject, let's say history or science, you would be teaching that in English. But it is different from EFL, where you would be focusing only on language elements, let's say grammar only, grammar, vocabulary, or 4 skills, reading, writing, listening, and speaking. One of the main underlying definitions of CLIL or principles of CLIL is that CLIL focuses on effective communicative ability. Now, there are some people, depending on context, that they may confuse CLIL with, let's say, different types of content and language integrated learning models like immersion, where people may be in the L1 context. But with CLIL, the focus is not on native speaker, so-called native speaker fluency. As long as students are able, they're capable of communicating their ideas effectively, that's fine. And there are a range of benefits of CLIL. among which CLIL lists like raising learners' linguistic competence and confidence, motivating student independence, and improving even L1 literacy. So when students learn in L2 in CLIL context, they are also becoming aware of the knowledge in L1. So the topic, this CLIL, it is so famous that it became widespread across the globe. In this led to formulation of different approaches to CLIL, which meant different types of CLIL. Again, depending on the contextual needs and the resources, we can identify CLIL between soft CLIL towards hard CLIL. Let's say if in a school, the CLIL is taught based on a soft CLIL approach, they would have only a few subjects taught through the CLIL methodology. And in those subjects, the key focus would be on language. So that would be like language-led. Whereas towards the hard CLIL, about half of the curriculum, or most part, again, depending on the context, there is no hard rule, is taught in the target language. And the content can reflect what is taught in the L1 curriculum or can be new content. But no matter what, regardless of the type of CLIL, the underlying principle of CLIL is the famous 4 C's framework coined by CLIL. The 4 C's stand for communication, cognition, culture, and content. Let's start with the communication. Here, communication means the language. So when you're teaching the content, your focus, the dual focus is on content and language. So you need to be able, the teachers need to be able encourage students to learn the language as well as the content. Of course, the learning activities should encourage students' cognitive thinking and cognitive abilities. For example, Bloom's taxonomy is a very good reference here that can be used by teachers. And the culture, which is in some contexts, it is not paid attention to a lot, but culture, when teachers teach the content, it is advised to encourage students to make links across cultures. For example, if the topic is on flood in an X city, ideally, you would be encouraging students to think of the flood in Y and Z cities in different countries or in different contexts, and the consequences of that for the people, and how people have solved that problem across different contexts. So now here, I would like you to look at these two activities, 2 pictures, and think which one is CLIL, which one is EFL. You can write in the chat if you want to. Okay. All right. So if we look at the picture on the left-hand side, which is an extract from the Cambridge Primary Science book, we can see that this is an activity, and there is a list of words like object, material, and ball. And the focus here is the giving words, or the terminology is to help students to complete the exercise, which is part of the content, which is part of the subject. On the other hand, in this activity, read and complete, the focus is on vocabulary. The focus is not on subject. So students will need to understand the text and fill in the gaps with appropriate vocabulary. In order to do this activity, there is no requirement on the student side to understand any subject, or the goal is not for them to learn a specific subject. So this is, in general term, a general comparison between CLIL and EFL activity. Let's look at some common challenges and see some, try to find some answers to those challenges. First of all, the schools, the teachers who would like to teach CLIL or who would like to learn more about CLIL, they have to understand that subject teachers need to feel confident about their English language proficiency. So these subject teachers teaching math or biology, let's say, they need to have certain proficiency, English language proficiency, to feel confident. Now, in some contexts, you would hear that some parents, they accept some teachers to have that so-called native speaker proficiency. So here we have to be careful. The teachers, they don't have to be native speakers, or they don't have to have that, whatever is called native language proficiency. As long as they are feeling confident and there is no fluency issues, they can smoothly communicate, explain the ideas, the content to students. It is fine, but the schools need to be, and the teachers need to be aware of the fact that they need to have at least some, proficiency and capacity to teach, to deliver the language in English. Another common challenge is that in some contexts, content teachers, at university, they of course they are trained for learning the content. They know the content, but they are not trained in teaching the content. So they may lack the pedagogic approach, that pedagogical knowledge. So it's been shown in the literature and empirical findings that this may lead to teacher-centered, teacher-dominated, teaching. But unlike subject teachers, CLIL teachers, EFL teachers have variety of activities to help they have ample opportunities to have that learner-centered teaching activities, and to be more aware of, let's say, contemporary pedagogic activities. So therefore, the subject teachers need to be in contact with the EFL teachers, and they need to learn how to teach their lesson in a learner-centered way. For example, supporting the mixed ability students. And the schools also need to support these teachers and to make them aware, or maybe train them in teaching in learner-centered way. And in some contexts, for example, in primary schools, language teachers, if teaching CLIL subjects, they need to feel confident about the subject knowledge. For example, in primary school, some EFL teachers may teach English as well as like social sciences. But again, it wouldn't be like content very subject demanding. However, depending again on the context, on the curriculum, on country, they may need to co-teach with the subject teachers, and they may need to support them. So EFL teachers, therefore, they need to feel confident about the subject knowledge as well. Of course, collaboration should be established among teachers, for example, EFL and CLIL teachers. And I have explained reasons. Other reasons could be that, for example, if CLIL teachers teaching the same class, they may get help from EFL teachers in terms of supporting their students from the language perspective. They may get help from the EFL teachers about some activities or exercises, how to support some students in their classes. And of course, coordinators should support the teachers. One example is like they should lead by example. In schools, the coordinators themselves, they must believe in the benefits of CLIL. If they don't believe, they're not going to be able to motivate the teachers, and this is not good. So coordinators should be ready for this. And of course, ongoing CLIL specific training should be provided. In some contexts, for example, schools may provide all sorts of training for teachers, but they may end up they not benefiting from this training. Why? Because CLIL is different from just EFL teaching, or CLIL teaching is just different from teaching in your own teaching subject in your own language. So when providing this training, when thinking of such opportunities, the school leadership, they need to think of CLIL specific training for these teachers. And in school environment, teachers and coordinators, they need to actively engage with the parents. Of course, in schools they do, but in the CLIL context, they need to explain the general approaches to CLIL, the expectations, the lessons, and also the teachers and coordinators may need to talk to parents and see how they can, maybe parents, they want to help their children with homework. And what happens in some contexts, for example, parents end up with using Google Translate or other translation materials. There is nothing wrong here, but unless they follow some rules. If parents or students, if they overuse these translation materials, what happens that they will depend on those materials, on those resources, and which is not good, which is against one of the underlying principles of CLIL, learning the content and language together. And maybe coordinators and teachers, they may support parents, and they may guide them, they may give them some information about the lessons and activities. So again, all these depend on the context and the school environment. So we talked about common challenges and some answers to those common challenges across different contexts. But what about effective teaching practices? So I will talk about some effective teaching practices, which is based on my own observation, own practice, also literature review, and some other empirical studies in different contexts. So first of all, identifying learning objectives and introducing the content. The teachers should make learning goals clear to learners. Teachers, when starting the class, when preparing the lesson, they need to make learning goals very clear. They have to have learning goals, and those should be clear. And they need to share those learning goals with the students at the end of at the beginning of the lesson, or one day before the lesson, so that students know what they're gonna do the following day or in the class. The teachers, the activities should be designed in a way that enables the teachers to make connections between the new and previously taught topics, because students are learning the subject in a different language. It can be difficult for them. Therefore, starting the topic right from scratch without any connection or link to previously learned concepts is not a it's not a good practice. So this should be beared in mind. Of course, the teachers need to use authentic or suitable materials and artifacts to teach content and language. In some contexts, one of the problems is that teachers say that they can't find authentic materials, so they prepare their own materials. But what happens is that if you take, let's say, a subject content, let's say if the content is about rainforest, and you took it from the L1 material, and you translate that into L2 and teach that, that may not always suit the context because you have to adapt the material according to students' levels. And you have to integrate the authentic materials like videos and other visuals. Okay, so we prepare the lesson plan. We thought of the general preparation, the materials, and we know that CLIL encourages the dual focus on language and content. So our job as a CLIL teacher, we're not the EFL teacher, but we are a CLIL teacher. Still, our job is to promote effective acquisition of L2. So we, when preparing the lesson objectives, we need to set language elements as learning goals to support the learning. And of course, language here need to be aligned with the topic. So what happens in some contexts, maybe because of teaching load, or maybe because of misconceptions about CLIL, the CLIL teachers, the subject teachers, they claim that they are teaching the subject and teaching language is not their job. This is wrong. So it doesn't mean that you have to teach all the language or you have to dedicate your whole lesson to teaching language. No, if you're teaching, let's say, about rainforests, you need to think of the language elements like vocabulary, grammar that will be useful for the students for their learning and production, of performances. Therefore, that language should be aligned with that topic, with that subject, and as well as embedding that in the language, in the activities. Teachers also need to provide extensive L2 input in oral and written forms. For example, when teachers explain the concepts, they may write the key concept or terminology on the board as they explain. And they need to help expand learners' L2 repertoire by introducing synonyms and antonyms, providing definition of concepts, paraphrasing, and using repetition. So they shouldn't just read from the material and repeat that. When explaining that content, the teachers need to be able to introduce some synonyms and some antonyms or paraphrase that information. This both helps the students to be, to understand the subject, the content better, and also it helps to expand their L2. And teachers need to create opportunities for learners to speak and write using their L2, and collaboration and equal participation are encouraged. For example, you may see, like in EFL classes, in any class, some students may be active, the others passive. You may think of activities, how you can, group active students with passive students, maybe, and also observe while conducting these activities, how they support each other. And of course, when you teach, you need to adapt your language to capacity of all learners in the classroom and provide additional resources or extra support. It doesn't mean that, teachers speak fast all the time. No, they need to sometimes slow down. And that's all totally fine in CLIL classes. Okay, now we finished L2 and another dual focus with the content. Of course, you're teaching the content and you're teaching that in L2. and using L2 as a vector for learning subject-specific concepts. But what happens, there is a problem. This is a problem across the globe in CLIL context. So what happens, teachers say that, because students cannot understand well the concept, because concept is difficult, even in their own language, let alone in foreign language. So they need to use translation. So they need to translate. If they don't translate, they feel that the students don't understand material, they don't comprehend. But here the problem arises. So what happens if teachers constantly do that? Then students may ignore teachers' delivery or input in L2. They may think that, oh, anyway, my teacher will translate, so I will rather focus on when the teacher translates that in my own L1 language. So I don't care. Why should I care? So this is first of all is against the principle of CLIL. That translation shouldn't happen. It should happen judiciously. So teachers should make that balance. Having said that, it is all right if teachers want to use their native language to ensure that students understand the the instructions or some difficult concepts. That's fine, but teachers need to make that balance. And for example, when teachers teaching concepts, especially, they need to ensure that students learn the terminology in both languages. For example, the terminology deforestation. If you're teaching in Brazil, they need to know the terminology in English, which is the deforestation, if it is English CLIL. And they also need to know what deforestation means in Portuguese language. And teachers, of course, they need to prompt learners reflect on cultural aspects of the subject matter content, which I talked about it. And they need to adjust learning activities as the situation demands to maximize learning. So sometimes what happens, teachers claim that in some contexts, the students don't have enough language capacity. That's why I'm gonna simplify the content. And what happens, this creates some dilemma. Then some people think that, oh, because then these students will not learn a lot, or they will learn less than the people who are learning the subjects in the L1. So that's wrong, because research shows that the students learning the subject in CLIL, they can be as good as the students learning that subject in the L1. So teachers need to be careful here. They should take a balanced approach, and they shouldn't simplify it too much. So that's one important aspect here. And when teaching, teachers need to make frequent use of comprehension checks that require learners to demonstrate their understanding. So that comprehension check can be, doesn't only mean that, oh, do you understand? They can formulate questions, and they can ask students to, for example, work on projects, work on some activities that really show their comprehension of the content. And of course, when teaching, because it's a subject, and you need to break complex information and into processes and scaffold content and language input by chunking information and using visuals. So if you're teaching about a topic, you need to be careful not to present that information all at once. So gradually, step by step, by chunking that information, both language and the content, and using visuals, of course, are very helpful activities. And of course, teachers need to provide timely feedback. Because they are CLIL teachers, and the focus is dual focus on language and content, you need to also provide feedback on their language. So not only content, but also language. All right, so we talk about those effective practices, and one of the important activities in the CLIL classes can be the KWL charts. These are very helpful because it gives sort of the opportunity for students to reflect on their learning, to reflect what they know, what they want to know, and what they have learned. What happens, for example, teachers may create a model, like one example, and let's say if the topic is on rainforests, the teacher may say that, okay, as an example, rainforests are dense forests. And what I want to know is that why are rainforests important? And hopefully at the end of the lesson, when students reflect, they may say that rainforests produce a large amount of the world's oxygen. Now, this is very important because in every subject this should be done. It's not exclusive to CLIL, but the importance of this KWA chart in the CLIL context is that because it is a demanding lesson, there is a subject, there is a lesson. So this gives them, this chart sort of gives students, guides students. It shows them a bigger picture. It also motivates them. So when they leave the lesson, they see it as a takeaway. In addition to this, what CLIL teachers could do is, so here I have provided, the sample shows the content only, the subject content, the topic, but also what language, for example, what terminology did I know about rainforests? And what terminology would I want to know? Like what sort of language would I want to know in order to express my opinions? And what sort of language or functional language or terminology did I learn at the end? So that dual focus embedded in this KWL chart would really work in this context. Okay, let's think of another activity, and I would like your help. Set communication skills and learning content as objectives of the lesson. So we said that CLIL requires that you embed that language element and also that content specific element as a lesson objective. If the topic is on rainforests, what kind of, let's say, language skills do you think we could include in our learning goal, in our lesson plan? Describe different environments. Yes, to use that description, the words, yes, to describe. That's from Chris. Thank you. Typical routine of the species. Yes, could be. What kind of terminology do you think? Language. Okay, maybe I should. All right. Let's say if I am planning my lesson plan as part of the communication or language being the lesson objective, vocabulary or terminology, biodiversity, deforestation, and many others. These are just two examples. And when doing this, I need to ensure that students also know this terminology or concepts in their L1 as well. So probably I would also prepare like an expression list or vocabulary list in 2 languages. And as grammar, let's say, if again it depends on the topic and on your lesson, maybe comparative sentences, or for example, the birds in X rainforest are, I don't know, they live longer than the birds in the other parts, as an example, or other grammar elements, again depending on that text. And what functions? For example, expressing opinions. I don't think that, in my opinion, I agree with the text author that. So these are some helpful functions to help learners to help learners support their language repertoire as long together in addition to the content. Learning content, for example, understand the importance of rainforests, why rainforests are important, identify threats to rainforests, etc. So this is just one small snapshot. Of course, we also talk that because CLIL is cognitively demanding, but we need to prepare our lessons in a way that to encourage students' cognitive thinking, and also, encourage them, make that references across the cultures. Let's say that we have here Amazon rainforest on the left-hand side and Congo rainforest or Congo basin, in another word. How would you design, let's say, a task or prompt to engage students' cognitive skills, and probably maybe encouraging them to use that, the skill linking this content to cultures as well? Any ideas? So Duda said, ask them about what differences they can spot between the 2 pictures. Yeah, again, you can be as creative. It depends on your classes, on the levels of learners. Yeah, making differences, exactly. That is one. Comparing and contrasting. Yes, these are the activities that can encourage the students' cognitive thinking. Eliciting what they know about such biomes, yes. Yeah. Use of the comparative adjectives. Yeah, of course, when you are designing an activity, you also have to provide that language element there. Okay, using maps, exactly, that's very good. So you don't, I mean, this is just a presentation. For the sake of this presentation, I've provided these 2 pictures, but again, it depends on teachers' own creativity and resources. Different country, geographical and cultural backgrounds. Shashik, thank you so much. And Mariana, if they know a place that has such biomes, yes. Maybe this is, this. Yeah, okay. For example, here, compare and contrast the Amazon rainforest with another rainforest, example, the Congo rainforest or basin, in terms of biodiversity, climate, and threats. Okay, now here, someone said that if they know already, Mariana said that if they know the place that has such biomes, yes. Let's say you can do this after maybe your content was like this, you talked about Amazon, and then you talked about Congo, etc. So then you sort of at the end of the lesson or maybe revision of as a revision of the lesson, you can ask students, you know, to come up with their answers to this task, or in CLIL, use of the technology, of course, internet resources is very important. You may ask students to search for the verb and to come up with the common features and or different you know, features between these two rainforests. So what happens here, we need to be again careful, because what is going on in CLIL classes, when you ask students to use the verb sources, what happens? They immediately go to, of course, there are exceptions, Google Translate, and they would find the content in their native language. They would copy and paste and use. And then here you go, this is my answer. So this is wrong. Therefore, as I said at the beginning of my presentation, that teachers need to think of this activity not as a standalone. So they need to provide students with instructions, with clear instructions, and they need to provide students with useful phrases or expressions in both languages. And I don't know, again, depending on the school, maybe they need to ban that use of the translation tools on the web. But the comparing and contrasting is one element of cognitive, you know, to build their cognitive skills. And hopefully you may ask them, for example, you may be creative, you may ask them, or how people tackle the, you know, these problems across, in these two different, in these two different contexts. So hopefully they will be able to make that link. For example, you can show this as one model. Commonalities, both rainforests have high biodiversity. And then you can show the Amazon has got the threats may include deforestation, and the other one could be threats for the Congo rainforest. Threats may include agricultural expansion. And you may model this, and then you can ask for the students to come up with 2 reasons, 3 reasons, 4 reasons, again, depending on the context and the focus of the lessons, with their own answers. And of course, it's very important after they do, they need to share their findings with their peers or their groups. So hopefully to create that, you know, discussions among them, that which is not, which sort of, you know, motivates them to speak about the topic. And this is giving them like sort of natural topic that they learned about the topic, they have the language repertoire, and they have searched about it, and now they are sharing the information with each other and they are discussing. Here are the references that I made. Sorry, and okay, I have to share one reference with you. I didn't know that's gonna be too quick. Some of the activities have been inspired by this TKT course CLIL model published by Cambridge University Press. If you're interested in, you know, hands-on activities, this book has got, how to say, you know, explanation, sort of guidance, and which would help you to come up with your own activities to suit the needs of your own context. Thank you so much. I hope I finished on time.
Thank you so much, Aynur. I can see that there was a lot of participation from the audience in the chat as you were presenting the key concepts. And actually, we also had a few questions and comments that I think they are questions. One of the comments comes from Chris Cossetti. She, when you were mentioning the challenges, she highlighted something here about the balance between the cognitive load when the students are learning both language and content. she sees this as a challenge. Would you like to comment on that, balancing the
Yeah.
cognitive demand between language and content? Yeah, that was
Yeah.
the point.
Yeah, thank you so much. This is a right point, actually. Many people talk about this challenge in empirical studies or in my experience in literature review, that CLIL is demanding. There is language and subject going on at the same time. The subject can be demanding for students even in their own language, let alone in L2. So what happens that teachers need to use a series of activities that could help those students, especially students, for example, with mixed abilities or needing maybe extra support. What can they do? As I explained, using visuals. Visuals are very, very, very helpful. So what is visual? When you explain the concept, as I said, you may write on the board, you may draw the picture, or you may use the sources from the internet, videos, YouTube videos or other videos. And you may also, as I said, scaffold the learners. You may divide or chunking that information into pieces. As I said, if you're talking about rainforest, you don't bombard students with the text and then saying that, okay, this is the text, this is my language list, here you go read and do these activities. Not like this. So explaining to students that, okay, understand, it's like building that mutual understanding, students know, teachers let students in a way know that, okay, I know your situation, I understand, but I am here to help you. And this sort of gives that, motivation to students, and that they know that teacher is aware of that. At the same time, teachers should also think of their own motivation, because what happens when you teach a lot, it's teachers, I'm sure they may agree with me, sometimes you would get demotivated. You will say, oh, these students don't understand, it's so difficult, it's very hard. But they should know that it takes time. But if they lay that foundation, gradual, step by step, they will see the benefits. And as I said, providing language expressions or vocabulary, the concepts in both languages are very helpful. This will also enable the students learn the concepts in their own language, which is CLIL is not against.
Yeah,
yes,
good
pre-teaching
point.
concept is very important.
Yeah, I was going to mention that, this comment from a colleague in Lumen Languages. I think somehow you have answered a question that was asked by Shashi, which relates to the risk that a student might face if they can't follow the content because their language level is not good enough. I think you have mentioned a few strategies, but Shashi asked another question, which was, should teachers have a minimum CEFR level to be able to teach in a CLIL context?
Yeah, again, this is depending on the context, depending on the country. Some countries, they have policy, like at the government level, they require teachers to have certain language proficiency, and teachers need to provide evidence of that language proficiency level. Either those tests may be, the internationally known test, or the test prepared by the government themselves. In other contexts, there is no hard rule. They sort of rely on, on the interviews. So, but obviously, if you're teaching, you have to have, some level of language proficiency. And yes, so it is like a policy level consideration that schools need to.
Well,
be
in my
aware of.
humble view and
Yeah.
taking into consideration my experience in language teaching, I would say that a good language level is required, not only level
Yeah.
of language, but also
Yeah.
a good level of knowledge about
Yes.
language, because like you
Yeah.
demonstrated in the activities, you need to consider language for communication, the outcomes
Yeah.
from the learner, and you
Yeah.
have to be able to know about the
Of
language as
course.
well
Yeah.
in order to be able to plan lessons,
Yes.
taking all those points into consideration.
That's why when I said, when schools they think of providing training to teachers, it's not just a training. So it's CLIL specific training, it's language, of course, and also the principles, the methodologies of CLIL are very important for those teachers. Yes, language proficiency is very important because you're gonna teach in English. If you ask me tomorrow to teach the subject in Portuguese, then I'm not gonna be able to teach that. I'm sorry.
Yes. Well, Aynur, we have a few more questions which I would like to send to you for you to reply, and then the team in Farroupilha Open Center can cascade to the people who have asked the questions. I would like to thank the audience for asking
Thank you.
questions, but unfortunately, we don't have time to discuss all those great questions that are cropping up in the Q&A. But if okay with you, I can send them to you, and then
Yeah,
later
sure.
we can share your answer with the people who asked the questions, because they're really good questions. Thank you ever so much for being with us. I mean,
just only one thing, because this is very important.
please.
I think everyone will benefit for it. Duda has asked that, considering the teacher's native language, what difference do you believe it makes for the teacher to have the same mother tongue as their learners or not? Well, this is very, very important in the theory of second language acquisition. It says that if you are teaching, if the teacher, for example, teaching the learners speaking Portuguese, it's very important because you know that the intricacies of your own language, and you can manipulate that. When students make that, cross references, you would say that, okay, so they are thinking in Portuguese, and that's why they are translating, into their own, into English. This is they are thinking in Portuguese, and this is how it reflects in their English. So that's totally fine. It doesn't have to be a speaker from a totally different country. However, what happens in school, the teachers need to be very careful. If they know that you're speaking the same language, the native language, they may not cooperate with you. They may think that, anyway, that teacher is speaking in Portuguese and I'm speaking in Portuguese, so I'm not going to speak in English. So again, depending on the context, you need to play with that. Thank you.
I see.
Sorry.
No, this is a valid point indeed. And also teachers sharing the same languages as the students can also deploy good strategies,
Yes.
to convey the concepts. That's a
Yeah.
benefit in a way.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Aynur.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for the questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Well, this was another great talk for the morning. But now I would like to invite someone I admire a lot. Sorry for my comments, making my own comments about the speakers. But the next speaker is Scott Thornbury, whom we would like to welcome to give the lecture on teaching EFL and teaching modern languages. Same or different? Well, Scott has taught and trained in Egypt, UK, Spain, and in his native New Zealand. So until recently, he taught on an online MA program for the New York school, for the new school in New York. And his writing credits include several award-winning books for teachers on language and methodology, including About Language, which is a classic, right? And his latest books are 30 Language Teaching Methods, 101 Grammar Questions, and 66 Essentials of Lesson Design, all published by Cambridge. And he's also the series editor for Cambridge Handbooks for Language Teachers. Well, from someone who has learned from many of your books, Scott, welcome. And it's a joy to have you with us today.
Thank you. Thank you for that lovely introduction. It's nice to be here. And hello to my friends and colleagues in Brazil, and beyond. I'm speaking to you from Spain, where it's now 10 to 5 in the evening. I'm conscious that it's probably still morning where you are. So I hope you're having a good day. I'm going to share my presentation, and this is what I want to address. Thank you, Cambridge, too, for making this possible. And as you said, I work as the series editor for the Cambridge Handbooks for Teachers, and I've written a number of books in the pocketbook series. What I want to address today is not specifically about the teaching of English, but it's about teaching of modern languages generally. And I'm going to talk for however long I've got, 50 minutes, I guess, and then hopefully we'll have time for questions and answers. And if the questions go into the box and be gathered together, so much the better. I read this came up in the recently in a article in The Guardian. And, you know, why not start a talk with a picture of Taylor Swift, particularly now since she's lent her weight to the US elections, but that's another story. This was an article about teaching Latin in Britain, as I remember it. The Cambridge University academic suggests that Latin should be taught more creatively. And one of the creative ways of teaching Latin was to integrate the lyrics from Taylor Swift songs. So he said that the Latin should be taught more like a modern foreign language, like English, Portuguese, Spanish, Italian, Russian, where students are encouraged to speak, sing, perform, or write creatively rather than just learning vocabulary and grammar, rather than just learning. That's how dead languages like Latin and Greek were learned, supposedly, by learning vocabulary and grammar from a primer. But translating hit songs into Latin, such as the hit songs of Taylor Swift, can enhance students' grasp of the different techniques used in Roman poetry, he said. Well, I thought, yeah, great, fantastic. But is it the case that it's only dead languages that are taught with just learning vocabulary and grammar? And I have this kind of lingering suspicion from my own experience that a lot of living languages, modern languages, could be improved by using exactly the same approach, a more performative, creative approach, rather than just learning vocabulary and grammar. And that's what I want to address today. Is the teaching of Portuguese, Spanish, or German, or Russian, or Japanese, etc., a case of being creative with the language, being communicative with the language, or is it just learning the vocabulary and the grammar? Way back, many years ago, over a century ago, in this book, it's still in print, incidentally, by Cambridge University Press, the writer is talking about modern languages, modern foreign languages like Portuguese, Spanish, etc. Modern languages should not be taught in the same way as the ancient tongues, that is to say, as Greek or Latin specifically. And this is very much the kind of thinking that underlies the development of the Common European Framework. If we go back to 1980, the threshold level of English document, which was a kind of laid the ground for the Common European Framework. So this was an attempt to standardize the teaching of languages, modern languages across Europe, not just English, but Spanish and Swedish and Turkish and whatever. And they said in there, one of these foundational documents, in spite of their diversity, the socio-cultural background of these countries in the European context is sufficiently homogeneous, that is to say, it's sufficiently the same to justify the assumption that large classes of foreign language learners will want to use the foreign language for approximately the same purposes wherever they find themselves. That is to say, a student of Swedish, student of Greek, student of Portuguese will have the same, approximately the same purposes for learning those particular languages. And that was the principle on which this was based. And it continued into the year 2000, when with this book, the CEF, the Common European Framework document, 2001, and they reflected on those initial intentions, and they said it is remarkable to what extent the framework of general and specific notions proposed in the threshold level has proved appropriate and adequate for 20 European languages, even from different language families. That is to say, the idea of standardizing the approach to teaching these 20 different languages was not a pipe dream. It was a realistic one, because they did share the same basic approach. And what was that approach? Well, they describe it again in their documents. For many years, the Council of Europe has promoted an approach based on the communicative needs of learners. The communicative needs of learners. And the use of materials and methods that will enable learners to satisfy these needs and which are appropriate to their characteristics as learners. And of course, we know that the Common European Framework has kind of expanded beyond the immediate European context, and now is a reference for designing curricula and coursebook materials in Brazil, as well as in Korea and Vietnam, wherever you want to go. It is the benchmark for many, many curricula around the world, because the understanding is that whatever language you're learning, you will have similar communicative needs, and therefore an approach which addresses those communicative needs will be the one that is appropriate. An approach based on the communicative needs of learners. That is to say, a communicative approach. So, okay, yeah, okay, but what is this communicative approach we keep talking about? Yes, in one slide, I'm going to summarize the communicative approach, just in case you missed it, just in case you've been away for the last 50 years. And this is a lovely summary from Zoltan Dernier's writing. And these are 4 bullet points describing what the communicative approach represents. In the communicative approach, activities promote real communication. That is, they engage learners in authentic, functional use of language. Okay, foundational principle of the communicative approach. Number 2, classroom communicative situation should resemble real life communication as much as possible, bringing the outside world into the classroom and connecting the classroom to the outside world. Fluency is more important than accuracy. This was a foundational principle, 1975. Fluency is more important than accuracy. Getting your meaning across, being intelligible, is more important than accuracy, not just with regard to pronunciation, but across the board. And typical communicative activities include role plays, discussions, problem-solving tasks, simulations, projects, and games. That's Zoltan Dernier, 2009. So, if we take the Common European Framework guidelines as our benchmark, then the argument is that whether or not you're teaching English, but whether you're teaching Greek, whether you're teaching Turkish, teaching Japanese, teaching Vietnamese, you are prescribing to these basic, this is the approach that underpins the CEFR, the communicative approach. And these are the kinds of features of your methodology that will be typical. Yeah, okay, but not so fast. There's some resistance from people who say that the communicative approach is generalizable to other languages. So here's an example. For example, this is a woman, she teaches in a college or university in the States where several languages are taught. And she herself teaches English, and she enrolls in a class of Chinese at the same institute where she's teaching. And what she noticed about the Chinese course was that it was radically different from the English course that she's teaching. And she keeps a diary, and this is a study that she does. And so she asked, why? Why does the intensive Chinese course depart so radically from the approach in the rest of the department. And the director responded, that as he understood it, it had been shown that Chinese is so different from the languages already familiar to most learners, largely Indo-European languages like Spanish, Italian, German, and so on, that communicative classroom methodologies were not effective. Communicative classroom methodologies were not effective for teaching Chinese. Yeah? Chinese is different. So we do it a different way. This is the Chinese department. And when she went on to ask, why do you think my brain would function one way when learning Italian, for example, and quite another way when learning an Asian language? Why should it be different? And she records, she says, slightly sarcastically, she records no response from the director. In other words, he could not answer that question. But this attitude I have encountered quite often, that, okay, communicative approach, great, it's fine, great for teaching English, but our language is different. And these are some of the reasons that are given. Our language is more difficult. Our language requires a high standard of accuracy. So when you say, okay, fluency is more important than accuracy, but not in our language. Oh, no. Russian requires a high standard of accuracy. This is the argument that's put forward. Or sometimes the argument is our language is threatened. Our language is at risk. It's a minority language, and it needs protection and respect. Yeah? Whereas the communicative approach is like, oh, anything goes, doesn't really matter what you say as long as you get your meaning across. No. If you're a speaker of Welsh or a speaker of Catalan, you feel that maybe such flexibility is as a threat to the language. So these are some of the arguments that have been put. So I want to ask, in the time that I have left, I want to answer these questions. Is it a fact that some languages are more difficult than others? Are they acquired differently? And should they be taught differently? So the first question then, are some languages more difficult than others? Well, you can go online and you can find lists of languages graded in terms of their difficulty. This is a classic list that comes from the Foreign Service Institute, large language teaching institute in the States, teaching mainly the military. It's been there for ages, and they have a huge database, and they know pretty well how long it takes people to learn Americans, English-speaking Americans, to learn Vietnamese compared to learning Italian, for example. So they have a list of languages and they categorize them in terms of their easiness. And these are the easy languages, category 1. You'll see, unsurprisingly, that Portuguese is up there, along with Spanish. And then the some easy languages in category 2. And even more difficult languages in category 3. It goes further. And then the really difficult languages in category 4, but these are not the most difficult because there's a category 5, which is like, forget it. If you want to learn Arabic, it's going to take you years. Of course, or Chinese, for example, or Japanese or Korean. Of course, if you're a Japanese speaker, maybe it's not going to take you quite so long. So it's all to do with your starting point. And this, remember, is for English speakers. It does not mean that for anybody else whose mother tongue is a different language, the same difficulties are going to apply. It's simply the distance between the target language, Arabic, for example, and English or Mandarin or whatever. Clearly, if you're learning a language which has few cognates, that is to say, fewer words that are similar to your language, it's going to be a harder job than if I'm learning Spanish, if I'm learning Portuguese. There's so many words that are going to be similar. If I've already learned Spanish, then Portuguese is going to be a pushover. So it's all to do with the distance, not the geographical distance, but the distance in terms of the language type, which has something to do with geography, admittedly, But that's not the only factor. There's factors like script. If you have to learn a new script as in Arabic or in Chinese or in Japanese, of course, that's going to add enormously to the teaching load. But that's not really learning the language. That's learning the script. That's the mechanics before you start even learning the language. But yeah, okay. So what do people say about this? Well, studies have shown that for example, here, findings from studies of grammatical development in typologically distinct languages. Typologically distinct languages mean languages from different families. So the Romance languages like Portuguese, Latin, Catalan, etc., as opposed to the Teutonic languages like, or the Scandinavian languages, these different language families. Some of these languages have more grammar and some of them have less grammar. But that doesn't actually make the task of the language learner harder. Nor does having less grammar make it easier. Because what do we mean by more grammar? When we say more grammar, we say, oh yeah, no, okay, Spanish or Portuguese has a lot of grammar because it has a lot of inflections. Has a lot of inflections. Take the verb forms. Okay, so this is Spanish, but I mean, those who speak Spanish, you don't have to speak Spanish, but Portuguese, very, very similar conjugation of, in this case, the verb tener, to have. Tengo, tienes, tiene, blah, 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 hundreds of different forms of that. Whoa, that's a lot of grammar. That's going to take me a long time to learn Spanish or Portuguese or Italian or French or whatever. Actually, no. We saw that actually these are the easier languages to learn, partly because the vocabulary is so easy to learn, relatively. But it is a case that they have more grammar in the sense of inflections. English is not an inflected language. It has very few inflections. We got rid of them. Sometimes people who write grammar books of English wish we had more inflections. I think there's something called grammar envy. English, if only it was like Portuguese or Spanish. And so you get this from old-fashioned course books. They put up these tables of the inflections of the verb to have, but there aren't any. Had I, you had I, I had not, had I, had. It's all the same. But they're still teaching it as if it were an inflected language. Now, fortunately, that has changed. But nevertheless, just because there's no inflections in English doesn't mean to say it's not difficult. And you, as teachers of English, know that it's very difficult, but it's difficult in different ways. Here's a text. This is a text. This is a Mexican student of English, first language Spanish. He's written a text in response to the question, do you use English in your work or your studies? Just read the text, and while you're reading it, think about the problems that this particular student is having with English. Okay, so now if this was a workshop, I'd put you into groups and chat with your neighbor and talk about, what is it that this student needs help with. But let's do that for you. Okay, there's problems with missing pronoun, it. I use it all the time. There's problem with the wrong preposition. I'm trying to apply it for some position. There's problems with articles, some position, apposition. There's problems with article omission at our university, or there's problems with the wrong article or our college, and I need the idiom wrong word, okay? Idiom, language, wrong article choice. I need that production. I need wrong word production. Again, borrowing from Spanish. Wrong preposition for my career. Article omission. I need to quickly learn English. Word order, I need to learn English quickly. Wrong determiner. My next months, my coming months, or my whatever. to dedicate wrong choice of verse. I think I need to dedicate time to learn this language. I think more time needs to be lit, etc. Wrong verb form, and so on. So the point is there that what the problem is not the inflections, because there aren't any, but it still masses a number of problems, even in that short text. And they're often to do with articles, prepositions, word order, etc. They're not to do necessarily with the verbs, although we spent a lot of time teaching the verbs. Maybe that's something we've inherited from grammar envy. But the little words here are the ones that are really causing this problem with students. So Bauer, in a book about language myths, says language A, example, Portuguese, may have more complex systems than language B, for example, English, in one area, and less complex systems in other areas. We cannot sensibly, he says, quantify the amount of grammar the language has. We cannot say that this language has more grammar than that language. All languages have immensely complex grammatical systems. And you might say, with the one exception of Esperanto, which was designed to not have a complex grammatical system, does have a grammatical system, but that's not a language that we need to concern ourselves with too much. All languages have immensely complex grammatical systems. John McWhorter elaborates on that point. He says it is sometimes said that all languages are equally complex, but he says more properly, all languages are complex to some degree. There are different degrees of complexity in different areas of the system. But what is the system in a language which is the most demanding in terms of learning the second language? And the answer is, it's not grammar at all, it's vocabulary. The difficult thing about learning a language is the vocabulary. The difficult thing about learning a language is the vocabulary. Think about it. How many words do you need to get to B2? You know, something like 6,000, 8,000 word families. The difficult thing about learning a language is the vocabulary, whether learning one's native language or learning a foreign language. Even your own language, you are still learning words to the day that you drop dead. You're learning new words, all the words related to the internet, etc. We learn the grammar of our native language before we start school, but we work on our vocabulary as long as we live. Vocabulary is then the most difficult part, and that which takes the longest time to learn. Hold that thought. Vocabulary is important. Very, very, very important. But let's go back to the second question now. Are different languages acquired differently? You know, you've got different languages, we accept that they're equally complex. There's no languages that are more complex than any others. But are they acquired differently when we learn them, particularly as a first language? Well, let's look at the research. This was a study done comparing 3 different languages, English, Finnish, and Samoan, and showing the stages that a child goes through as learning these languages as their first language. And notice they're very similar in many ways. So these 2-word utterances in English, more car, in Spanish and Finnish, bunny throws, in Samoan, fall thing. We'll go down the list, boot off, saw there, want sleep. This is attested across all languages that children go through the same stages, and more or less it takes the same amount of time. Even in a language like Finnish, which is famously different from other languages like English or Portuguese or Russian. The same stages. And then when people are learning languages as a second language, it's the same applies. A major study was done in the 90s that looked at immigrants in Europe. Immigrants whose first language, that's in the second line there, range from Punjabi through to Finnish, including Spanish, Arabic, Turkish, and Italian. And they were scattered around Europe, and they were learning different second languages, including English, German, Dutch, French, and Swedish, through contact. These are adults, yeah, migrants. They're learning English, as it were, in the street, at the workplace. And all the learners in this study seem to follow basically a very similar trajectory. That is to say, for example, one of the tasks that they were given was they had to narrate, they had to tell the story that they'd seen of a little video clip, a little animated film, and they tell the story. And they did it in other languages which they were learning. And the first phase is a kind of what they call the pragmatic phase, where it's just like you put the activities in the order that they happen. She'd steal bread and run away. No grammar, no sequencing apart from and. She steal bread and run away. This is the story. And then there's a sort of lexical phase where they use particular words that denote time sequence. Then the car of police come. Yeah, no grammar still, but then marking a time relationship. And then the grammatical phase, and suddenly she cried. Past tense, yeah. But this same kind of development pattern seems to be very common to all these languages. So this very quickly then would seem to me to suggest that yes, all languages are acquired in very similar ways, whether it's first languages or second languages. There's no language that takes longer to be learned as a first language because it's more complex, for example. So finally, should different languages be taught differently? Way back, 100 years ago, Harold Palmer, the kind of grandfather of our field of English language teaching generally, 1921 said, he's talking about designing courses for teaching different languages, not just English. He said certain moods and tenses are more useful than others. So he says, let's concentrate on the useful ones first. Yeah. In a language which possesses a number of cases, yeah, think of German with all the, nominative, accusative, blah, blah, blah. We will not learn off the whole set of prepositions, their uses and requirements, but we will select them in accordance with their degree of importance. Yeah. There's no point in learning the whole system, but select the ones that are the most useful, the most important. And he goes on to say, let us first learn these essentials and leave the details to a later stage. Now, when he wrote that in 1921, there was a lot of guesswork about what was the most important. But now, because of corpora, that is to say, databases of tested language, real language use, both spoken and written, we have a much better idea of what is more important in terms of a language. So think of English, think of it. What's more important? What's more important? The learning the present simple or the present perfect or the present continuous? Think about it. Or similarly, the past. That is to say, what is going to be more useful? And you might think, well, this is the result of a study done of British English, spoken and written, in 1999, reviewed in 2023, across 4 different registers: conversation, fiction, use, and academic language. And you can see the relationship between the simple, that's both past and present simple, the perfect, which is the blue, and the progressive, which is the red. And you see that it's like the progressive and the perfect, they're kind of like icing on the cake. They are so infrequent relatively, even across different registers, fiction, news, and academic writing. It's more or less the same. You could get by without ever knowing the present perfect continuous, for example. So this is what I think Harold Palmer was getting at. Teach the essentials first. Teach the simple aspect, present simple, past simple, and leave the rest to Okay, so here's a question for you. What do you think, looking at the modal verbs, which of these would you rank as the most frequent and the least frequent? I mean, I don't expect you to put them in order, but, you know, decide which are the one or two that are really, really frequent, and then those that are less frequent. And then I'll show you what the corpus says. And there's, I mean, maybe no surprises here. Course books now are starting to reflect more accurately this kind of information, but we didn't, yeah, people are posting in, okay, can, least frequent, ought, thank you, fantastic, will, must, should, this, sashi, will and can, will, can, yeah, you're pretty good, yeah. Oh, this is not news to you. Well, here you are, here's what, again, the same source said, will and can, yes, but how many of you had would? And think about it. Would is actually a very useful because it covers a whole range of different functions and functional language, as in invitations. Would you like? Would you, etc. So, but looking at the tail end, you think, is there any point in teaching shall, for example, or might, or must, or teaching it for production, teaching it maybe for reception, but certainly not must. Must. Well, let's look at must out of curiosity. If we go into the corpus, the British National Corpus, we see that must. What is the verb that most commonly follows must? Well, there's two: must be and must have. Hugely, hugely frequent. Look at the numbers, the frequency numbers. Massive, must be. And what is the verb that follows must be? And the most common one is must be made. Must be taken, must be given, must be done, must be said. Number 7, must be said. And when I looked at that, I thought, must be said. There's an expression there. And sure enough, if you home in on that corpus, you see that 99% of the examples of must be said are the expression, it must be said. It must be said. Meninga must be said. Do not like a man under her. Nice little expression. Maybe that's a great way of teaching must. And you could go a bit further and say, what are the words that must be made was really common. What are the words that come before that? And the most common one is allowance. And then allowances must be made. And so we have certain kind of patterns here of frequency that are related to certain fixed or semi-fixed expressions. And the same thing happens in Spanish. Now, forgive me, this is research I've done in Spanish, but I'm sure it relates very similarly to Portuguese. So this is the corpus of Spanish, mostly written in Spanish, admittedly. And these are the most common words in Spanish. And if you look more closely, you'll see that number 22 is tener, our verb again. That verb we've already looked at here. Yeah, the verb with all these different forms. There's tener, 22nd most common word in the Spanish language, worth learning. But that's not enough. Are we just going to teach tener? We're going to teach all these different forms of it? Let's have a look. Which is the most common form of tener? And if we go in a little bit closer, we'll see that the most common, 55, the most common, in fact, it's tiene. Yeah, the third person form is the most common form. Think, okay, so if I'm teaching on the basis of frequency, I don't have to teach all, the past subjunctive and the pre-perfect, blah, blah, blah. Just teach tiene to start with. And maybe the expressions which are associated with tiene. What does tiene collocate with? Let's go into a corpus, the corpus of Spanish. And let's see, tiene, yes, it is the most common form. Tiene, tener, tienen, tengo, tenemos, tenía, blah, 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 blah. Tiene hugely more common. And then what does it mean? Now, if you go into a book of Spanish or a website, it'll say tener means possession. And they give these examples. I have a dog, you have a brother. It's interesting, they don't give the Spanish versions anyway. This is what So it's all about having things, dogs and brothers and cats and money and a house and four. But actually, if you look at the corpus, it's not to do with having things. It's all, most of it is metaphorical. Yeah, it's an abstract verb, abstract nouns. Tiene derecho, tiene lugar. You can translate these in your head into Portuguese. Tiene razón, tiene miedo. Nothing to do with forks or children or dogs. The most common expressions are, for example, el tiene derecho. He has the right. And if we had an article, we get similar kind of, again, mostly abstract nouns. And it starts to me to suggest a way of teaching the verb tener through some of these collocations. If we look at tengo, the first person form, we get a number in the materials that tells us, oh yeah, tengo hambre, tengo sed, tengo frío. These are useful expressions. When we look at the corpus data, we see that yes, tengo miedo, that was number 5 in their list here, and that is the most common one in the corpus. I'm afraid. Tengo ganas, I want, tengo tiempo, etc. And if we go into the negative form, or with the article, we see similar kind of things. So a few more concrete nouns here, like tengo un hijo, tengo un amigo. And if we go into no tengo, then we get, again, some very common expressions and very useful expressions. So the argument I'm putting forward here is that maybe the way in to teaching a complex verb like tener is to teach some of these common expressions, which we now have access to by going online to free corpus sites like this. And you could do the same if you're teaching Portuguese. Find the most common expressions with tengo, no tengo, the equivalent of. One more for good measure, tengo que. I'm not sure if you have this equivalent in Portuguese. I'm sure you do, but I have to do. And this is the most common verbs with tengo que, hacer, tengo que decir, tengo que ir. Again, suggesting. And then one more for good measure, teniendo. It's not a very common form of the verb, but it always, almost always occurs with en cuenta, taking into account, teniendo en cuenta. You know, I would not surprise me if there's a close Portuguese equivalent of that. But the point is that you do not need to learn the whole grammatical system. Just as with English, you learn the common words and their collocations, just as in Spanish, just as in Portuguese and Chinese or whatever. Learn, start off lexically. Because Harold Palmer, again, way back 100 years ago, said, in answer to the question, what is the most fundamental guiding principle? What is the most fundamental guiding principle to conversational proficiency or fluency, whatever you want to call it? It is this: memorize perfectly the largest number of common and useful word groups, phrases, expressions, chunks, formulaic expressions, whatever you want to call them. Memorize perfectly the largest number of common. Now we know what a common now, frequent, corpus data tells us what's the most common, and useful. Well, again, some expressions will be more useful for students than others, depending on what they want to do with the language. But that seems to me such good advice coming from 1925, re-echoed in 1991 by John Sinclair, who said learners would do well to learn the common words of the language very thoroughly, whatever the language, Spanish, Portuguese, Russian, Chinese, Vietnamese, because they carry the main patterns of the language. And more recently still, based on research into second language acquisition, Rod Ellis and Natsuko Shintani said the prevailing view, this is about second language acquisition today, whatever the language, is that learners unpack the parts that comprise a sequence, teniendo and cuento. And in this way, discover the second language grammar. It comes out of these expressions, these formulaic, very common formulaic expressions. In other words, formulaic sequences serve as a kind of data pack from which grammar is generated, whatever the language. Okay, so what are the takeaways? We're about to wrap up. I would say well, first of all, it goes without saying, because it's the most difficult challenge facing learners, is to teach lots of vocabulary. And also, I would add, teach learners strategies for accessing vocabulary when they're out of class through extensive reading, through watching videos, through word cards, whatever. Select grammar that is frequent and useful. So if you're teaching an inflected language like Portuguese, don't teach the whole system. I say, you've got to learn all these verb tables. I don't need to know the third person form of you and the imperfect tense. No, because I'll never use it. I need to know tengo. Encourage, and then I need to know tengo in relation to its high frequency collocations, the chunks that go with it. And as Palmer says, this, you can't do it, memorize these, learn them by heart, put them into dialogues, practice them, etc. And then going back to the principles that shape the communicative approach and the common European framework, reward communicative competence rather than accuracy. Whatever the language, fluency for adult learners of English, and I think for most younger learners too, fluency is the objective. And that should be the objective. It should be what's tested in the exams. Unfortunately, it isn't so often, but reward communicative competence. Yes, I can understand you. Yes, I know what you mean. Yes, you are intelligible, rather than accuracy. Because as Henshaw and Hawkins said in a recent book, give priority to understanding content over understanding rules. I mean, that's the basic principle of the communicative approach. It's been around since 1972, and they're still having to say this. In 2022, give priority to understanding content over understanding rules. Plan your lessons around communicative goals. Yeah, being able to make requests, being able to apologize, being able to tell a story, rather than a list of grammar structures to cover. Whatever the language you're teaching. So reward communicative competence rather than accuracy. And then finally, I've been privileged myself by having learned a number of, I've been in classrooms with a number of different languages, some of which have been threatened languages or languages at risk. Te Reo Maori, for example, the languages spoken by the indigenous people of my own country, New Zealand, Aotearoa, or Catalan here in Catalonia, where I live. And one of the things that really impressed me about my teachers is their affection for the language that they're teaching, their love of the language they're teaching, the joy they get out of teaching a language which is relatively not well known or widely spoken. Their ownership of the language, and not just the language, but the culture associated with it, the songs, the proverbs, the expressions, etc. And I think we've lost that a little bit with English. Unsurprisingly, because English is a global language, it doesn't have a culture. It doesn't have a single literature. Nobody loves English. But it's a kind of pity, yeah, because something that, as a learner, that really infects you and motivates you is to see how much the teacher loves the language that she's teaching. So if you can somehow, even with English, terrible English, boring English, global English, somehow project your enthusiasm for that language. If you're a teacher of English, if you're a teacher of Portuguese, it's not so difficult. If you're a teacher of Japanese, or if you're a teacher of Catalan, it's not so difficult to project your enthusiasm for the target language. And of course, apply these principles to the teaching of English as well, if that's what you do. So thank you very much. It's been great to talk to you. And I'm not sure we have any time for questions.
Scott, this was amazing, because one of the things that motivated me to become a language teacher in the 80s was my love for the English language that I was learning in this city called Recife in the northeast of Brazil. You've been there in 2014,
Yes,
and
I
I was
have,
there with
indeed.
you. I have a photo with you there. So I actually have a question about the frequency of those modal verbs that you showed. you said that will is, comes as the most frequent in the graph. My question is whether that data relates to a specific country, or is it generally speaking, like the users or the speakers of the English language in general?
It's a very good question. I think more relevant actually to the question is the use of shall. As we saw that shall was way at the other end. And that's because shall in American English is not used at all. I mean, it's almost vanishingly rare. So, but even in British English now, and that after all, that data was done in 1999, and both languages have moved. But if anything, the British English has moved closer to American English for various reasons, and therefore there's probably even less use than shall. With regard to will, I mean, what's interesting, in fact, is in comparing will to going to, with regard to expressing future time, which is also included in the same reference as I've gotten. It does still show that will is more common as an expression of future time than in going to, because of written English. There's it's weighted towards will. We tend to use will more often when we're writing than we use going to, which is thought of being a bit more colloquial, or informal, let's say. But this is moving data. I mean, it's changing constantly. And when I put up that chart, for example, of the progressive aspect being so relatively small compared to the simple. This is 1999 when that data was first assembled, and this was pre-mobile phones virtually. But now when you think of people on their mobile phones, they're consciously saying, "Oh, I'm just getting on the bus. Oh, I'm just walking out of the chemist. Oh, we're just having dinner right now. Oh, I'll phone you back because I'm washing the dog." We use it all the time.
Yes, I remember to mock this kind of dialogues that we saw in course books in the 80s and early 90s. Like, okay, maybe you are blind, so maybe the interlocutor is blind, so you are telling them what you are doing, because the way we drilled the present continuous was quite unrealistic. But now with the mobile
Now
phone,
we
that
do it all
makes
the time.
sense. Yes, exactly. Well, I was wondering whether if we had that data from Brazil, can would probably appear as number one, because Brazilians love the modal verb can, and they learn it first thing when they try to speak in English, especially can I.
It's exactly what I mean. These verbs are very versatile. Verbs like can, of course, because they can apply, they can mean both ability, but also they're useful in making requests. And which is the case with English as well, which is why can is very, very popular. But this is the kind of whatever the language you're teaching, there are going to be certain forms which are going to be used much more than others. And we need to know that if we're teaching those languages. And fortunately, this kind of information is now more readily available. As I said before, it's taking its time to kind of move into course books, etc. But it is informing course books much more than it used to.
Yeah. Well, I have one final question. I loved your takeaways. I think everyone has also appreciated that they are also important. But one question here, which was anonymously asked, was, what would you say are the best strategies so as to foster memorization of high-frequency chunks?
Yes, good question. And I didn't have time to go into that. But I think some research has been done, which to me seems to be quite suggestive, is that putting them into dialogues, even if they're quite invented dialogues, but putting a lot of chunk, just as we, with phrasal verbs, for example, when we've been teaching phrasal verbs for a long time, and they're a kind of a chunk. And one way of making phrasal verbs more palatable is to take phrasal verbs of a similar topic. So, for example, all the phrasal verbs associated with relationships, get on with, break up, go out with, all that kind of thing, and put them into some kind of text. But put them into a dialogue, even better, because then students can practice speaking them and even maybe memorizing the dialogue. So the research into people who've been experimenting that seems to be, as I say, quite interesting. And that it's, in a sense, it's a little bit going back to how we taught functional language. Remember functional language? Those of you who are as old as I am in the 90s, so functional course books with expressions, you know, requesting expressions, apologizing expressions, asking favors, blah, blah, blah. Could you do this? Would you do that? I'm very sorry I couldn't, or complaining expressions, etc. We learned them in dialogues, and we practiced the dialogues, we memorized the dialogues. And now what we didn't know then was which were the most useful expressions in that, and also the most learnable. Some of them are quite, you know, would you mind opening the window? It's not worth teaching because it's too complicated. It's too polite. It's too, you know, but can you open the window? Would you open the window? That's fine. So that's what we need to practice.
Well, Scott, again, it was a joy to have you with us. I hope you have enjoyed it as well. And I also hope that you managed to get up to a lot of entertainment since you are in Spain. And Spain has always a lot to offer. Thank you ever so much for your talk and for all the insights.
Thank you. It's been a great pleasure. Wonderful talking to you all, and have a great rest of the day. Thank you. And I'll sign out. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Well, everyone, as we say here in Brazil, somos brasileiros e não desistimos. We will do one last attempt with the video. And I hope you managed to see the video that was beautifully made for you. So off to the video first, and then I promise we will go to the final goodbye and the final words.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Cambridge Experience 2024. We are delighted to have you here with us today. Since 2010, Colégio Farroupilha has been at the forefront of education by incorporating Cambridge English exam preparation into its curriculum. This integration connects our students' proficiency levels with the international standards of the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages, ensuring a communicative and effective learning environment for our students. This year marks the 6th edition of Cambridge Experience, which began in 2019, with a mission to enhance the professional development of English language teachers and positively influence education practices.
Inspired by the pioneering work of John and Britta Haycraft, who shaped English teaching and professional development since the 1950s, we've had the privilege of hosting many distinguished speakers. Such names as Nick Saville, Silvana Richardson, Ben Knight, Jasmine Silva, Alberto Costa, Glenn Hughes, Joanna Zouk, and Mirella Ramazziotti. We are proud to continue this tradition and thrilled to welcome Aynur Karakoc, Pablo Toledo, and esteemed Scott Thornbury. Over the past 6 years, the Cambridge Experience has hosted 19 lectures and engaged more than 8,500 participants. This success wouldn't have been possible without the support of Cambridge University Press and Assessment, particularly Leonardo Esperança and Sheila Evans.
Furthermore, the Cambridge Experience led to the establishment of our Farroupilha Open Center. As an authorized center, we are excited to offer Cambridge exams and collaborate with institutions like yours. Consider becoming a preparation center of BR 249. We hope you find today's event inspiring and valuable. Wishing you an excellent Cambridge experience.
Thank you, everyone, so much for being with us. We have some final thoughts, and I have a final slide to share with you with important content, right? So we have here the final slide to say thank you. Our event has come to an end, and we hope this morning has provided you with valuable insights that inspire meaningful reflection. I think we had a lot of reflection today, and practical application. We also had a lot of practical application today in your educational environments. On behalf of Farroupilha Open Center and Escola de Professores Inquietos, we sincerely thank you for your participation, and along with the invaluable support from Cambridge University Press and Assessment, and all of those who made this event possible. We also apologize for the technical problems we had at the beginning, but we cannot forget, let's follow Farroupilha Open Center on Instagram. For all the latest news, you will also receive information about participation certificates, which will be available for download for all of those who complete the feedback survey. The survey link will be sent to you, so keep eyes open for that. And also, it will be sent to the emails that you used during the registration for the Cambridge Experience. We look forward to seeing you again soon and welcoming you in our next edition of Cambridge Experience. Unfortunately, this was the first time where we had a technical problem, but hopefully next time it will be as smooth as it has always been. Have a fantastic weekend, everyone, and thank you once again for being with us.